Hi and good morning, everyone. Wonderful to have you all here. I am Sahil Sajid. I am a Story for Glory Fellowship winner and a student at the Indian Institute of Management, Ranchi. It's an honor for me today to host this discussion on the occasion of National Children's Day. And in recent times, we have witnessed the need for a shift in how our educational system functions. We can no longer rely on older traditional forms of learning as a sole teacher for students. And in light of the same, today's panel's focus will be to discuss the mechanics of making children the central stakeholders in today's education system in India. And we will be exploring the systematic and institutional issues that key stakeholders, such as civil society organizations, educators, and NGOs, face while working towards a more inclusive and student centric education system. And for this, please join me as I welcome our well listed panelists over here. So, starting with, we have Juhi Sharma. Juhi is one of the emerging leaders in India in the field of social emotional learning and mental health in India. Currently, she has founded and is leading two organizations in India. One of them is Light Emotions Matter Foundation and Unbottled Emotions. Juhi is a Stanford Ignite alumna, a program on entrepreneurship and innovation by Stanford Graduate School of Business, and incubated the idea of Lightup, also qualifying for the top 8 idea generators. She, along with her team, recently qualified for the Ember Mental Health Program 2022, United Kingdom, where Lightup EMF is the only organization from India to ever qualify. Glad to have you here, Juhi, in the panel, and welcome to the discussion. I believe she's facing some technical issue. Well, next in the panel, we have Priyank Sharma. Priyank is an international education consultant and a doctoral scholar at the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. He has a multidisciplinary educational background of engineering, social work, psychology, and education. Priyank is also a JRF awardee and has both national and international publications to his name. Once again, glad to have you here in the panel, Priyank, and welcome to the discussion. Our third panelist is Devashobha Chandramouli. She is a mom of two and the founder of Kidskinta, a conscious parents and educators collective. She founded Kidskinta with a mission to connect the everyday parent and educator to science-based strategies to overcome the challenges of modern parenting and education. She is the host of India's first and largest virtual parenting summit on conscious parents and has partnered with UNESCO to present the Special Kids International Summit, SPINS, in 2020 for special children and their caretakers. She is also the recipient of Business World 40 Under 40 for Impact in Education. Welcome to the discussion and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have Pragya Watts, who is our next panelist. Pragya is the head of campaigns with Save the Children, Bal Raksha Bharat. She believes in the people's power for social good. And as a campaigner, she's passionately committed towards furthering the agenda of child rights and gender equality. She strongly upholds equality and inclusion of agency, choice, and voice, And in 2013, she was listed among 50 women in India to follow on Twitter. And in 2022, she featured among 17 women SDG champions recognized by Twitter India and SafeTie. Welcome to the discussion. Now we have our last panelist, which is Preeti Vikram. Preeti is a passionate educationalist and parenting coach. She has authored and presented papers on education and parenting globally. She is an experienced professional who has trained teachers, coached parents, and worked with government bodies in shaping policies. She is also a serial entrepreneur, having built three successful businesses in education, leadership, mentoring, and training over the last 2 decades. Ms. Preeti Vikram is an IIM Bangalore alumna, currently pursuing her PhD in school leadership. Welcome to the discussion, Preeti. It's nice to have you here. And I really hope I've covered all of your bios really well. If you would like to add something, please feel free. All right. Now, moving on to the discussion. So, I've got a couple of questions for all of you, which is very relevant to the topic we have in hand. Starting with Preeti. So, you have been working on a very unique project that goes to the root of including children in the design of the educational environment. So, can you explain the primary motivation behind this and what is the expected outcome of this initiative?
So we started the Jugger project, which is to capture the children's voices in how they want their school campuses to look like. What are some of the changes that they want to see in the way their space is designed, right? So traditionally, I think the considerations for building a school has been number one, budget, and number two, how is it convenient for the adult? I don't think the convenience for a child, especially in terms of understanding how they learn, has ever been considered for the project. So the design has always been in outside in, and the children are spending most time during their childhood in the school. So it goes to show that we haven't really considered a lot of what the children's desires and ambitions and vision for their space should look like. And so this is a project which hopes to capture that voice and get some inputs from children as to what they want to see in the way that their campuses are designed. And obviously, in order to give those voices, they also need to be given the inputs on how spaces are designed, what are some considerations that are usually kept in mind. So they have a few master classes which help them to understand design principles and come up with the thoughts. So the primary consideration is definitely to provide children a voice. Secondly, I think your question also asked about what are the expected outcomes. I think
Yeah.
we hope to see a sustained kind of conversation around children's voices. This is our first year with the Jaga project, and we hope that each year we are able to build on that and keep this conversation going with different geographies. Hopefully, children's voices across the world will have a say in how their schools are designed. I think other panelists, especially people like Pragya who have worked with children's rights, will know that one of the rights for children is to have a voice, is to have an opinion. And that, I think, has been the one that we have heard the least of. And I'm hoping that conversations like this will allow for more and more of that to be heard. I think the United Nations Convention on the Children's Child Rights, as well as the UNICEF's ratification of and how to ensure that is heard, are both today not as actively pursued as the other SDGs. So that's something that we hope to bring the focus on through this project.
Very well answered. I believe that covers that question pretty well. And adding on to that, like, what role do you think the educational system and the rules of one influence the learning capabilities of a student?
Um, it's a very loaded question, and I think we need
Yeah.
to unpack that a little bit, right? Education system itself in India today is going through a massive paradigm shift. I think we're, thanks to one, the kind of classes that parents and children had to attend during the pandemic, and we all realized, oh my God, I'm studying exactly what my parents have studied, or the parents realized there's nothing different that the children are looking at this today. And secondly, because of the national education policy which came out in 2020, India is at the threshold of change, and I think that's really fantastic. So when you look at a systemic approach to education, when you look at it as a whole system, we are undergoing change, but there's miles to go, of course. But its role in how the learning of a child is shaped, right? I mean, we've somewhere missed the bus that the onus of learning has to be on the child, because today children are taught what to learn and not how to learn, and I think that has been a biggest gap in what we have done with our education system, because we are not equipping children with how to learn. And so today the textbooks are defining how much exactly the children are learning, and the teachers are defining exactly how that learning has to be assessed, the way the answers should be shaped, etc. So I think more and more freedom and democracy in education is what is required in terms of ensuring that the learning is something that the child takes control of, and we allow the child to explore to the extent that they are interested in. So it makes it more meaningful. It makes it more contextual for the child while learning happens. So I think the way the education system has to turn on its head and look at children not as a tool for economic development, like tomorrow what job is the child going to hold, but more from the point of view of, can this child be impacted by the world and at the same time impact the world that they are living in, because they are contributing citizen, right? So India has the youngest demographic in the world, and I think it's time that demographic got a voice.
That clearly answers that question. And as a student who just got done with my class 12 and who just ended college, these are some changes that I would have really loved to see, during my school years. And I really hope all of these come into practice pretty soon, so that a lot of other students will get that, could make the most out of the system and most out of their lives. Thank you, Preeti. And next, I've got questions for Priyank. And if anyone would like to add on to the questions I just asked, feel free to do so. Else, we could move to the next round of questions. All right, thanks. So, Priyank, you are a school transformation expert and have worked closely on school structures, right? And from your work, do you think it's possible to classify school structures broadly?
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you so much for the intro in the start. Uh, I think we should begin by understanding what do we mean by school structures, because when it comes to research, when it comes to innovations, we are kind of, so to say, obsessed with what happens inside the classrooms. We are kind of obsessed with what pedagogy students take in, how can you have a child-centered learning, a project-based learning, and things like that. But structures kind of, more or less remain the same. So if you ask any child anywhere, which grade are you in, they almost every time have an answer. Why? Why do we have to be in a particular grade? That's a structure which we're accustomed to. So if I am someone who has a particular socioeconomic cultural background, probably I'd want to take time in studying English, but I'm good in math, so I would want to rush it. So probably why not be, I'm someone who is in 10th grade for mathematics but 5th grade in English. So it really depends on how, on a lot of factors, but again the factor which you spoke about, the social cultural background you come from and the kind of parental involvement you have. So depending on that, the students should be free to decide or take up these courses and slowly move ahead, because this whole idea that everybody has to be in a particular grade, come to an institution, sit in the same peer group, and then quickly move to the other class in a particular year. So yeah, there's a defined syllabus for a particular year for every subject. And then secondly, I'd like to add, if you look at the onus on teachers, too huge. You know, it is the teachers who are responsible for that outcome. Teachers who are responsible for every child learning. What about the biggest strength, the bigger pillars of our education, the students themselves? So when the teacher enters the classroom, so what we really like to ask them, suppose there's a result day and we enter the classroom and we ask what are your results. So every child will be so happy, I got this much marks, I got this much marks, and the teachers will give giving accolades depending on the marks you got. Same is the feedback to the parents. But nobody asked that, if you are the topper of your classroom, of whatever grade you are in, how come the other students are lagging behind? How come you got so much and the other person, you are not even able to pull each other up? Where is the community in that classroom? That in okay, it's fine if somebody has to get more marks, that's fine, but where is the responsibility as a community, not just as a teacher who is responsible for every child? So these are structures which we live in. So I try to analyze and try to see how we can disrupt them.
Okay, that was pretty clear, and thanks for explaining that in a very easy to understand way for those who don't know what they mean. And what factors, like I believe you mentioned it slightly, but to elaborate a little bit, like what factors do the structures depend on, like socio-cultural factors, community involvement, linguistic influence, etc. So, what are some of the key factors?
See, a number of them. So, you have already mentioned socio-economic and cultural factors and the background students come from. Because, again, when we say child centered learning, what you want to emphasize on is center the education around the child, where the child is placed, around the context. If the child is coming from a particular context, then your pedagogy has to be aligned with that context. I was looking at this government Diksha app, and they were teaching fractions. So when they were teaching fractions, the first question was giving an example of coins, the coins which are used in casinos. They call it chips. So how do particular students from particular community understand chips? They don't know about chips. So we really need to find ways to relate to the student. So I think the major factor is the context of the child. Of course, where though NEP is arguing that every child has to be taught in their mother tongue as much as possible, but there has been a huge debate about it. How much of it can really happen on the ground.
True, true. And so, just like you mentioned, and what factors are easily overlooked in building an inclusive environment? Like it's always easy to overlook a couple of factors when the scale is so massive. And have you had any pleasant surprises along the way?
Yeah, in fact, the example which I was talking about is from a school in Tamil Nadu. It's called Puvidam. When I entered that school, in one single classroom, you will see students from different disabilities sitting together. So there's someone who has a mild intellectual disabilities. Of course, when it comes to severe disabilities, intellectual disabilities, it is difficult. You'll have spaces which really caters to that. But mild intellectual disability people with other forms of disability and so-called people without disability called normal as such, everybody is sitting together and then learning. So how does that learning happen? Can you imagine? We talk a lot about inclusive education, you know and we have big jargons for that, but how does that really happen? Can you have students from different backgrounds and disabilities and abilities come together and learn? That can only happen when you have that community. That can only happen when you come together and make it, each of whoever is part of the community, whether the parents, the students, and everybody has to come together. It cannot be a one person, one teacher, one student effort as such. What happens when student goes back to the house? What is the community they are coming from? See, we talk a lot about edtech being able to give affordable coaching or affordable experiences as such, but if you look at government schools, if you look at really the ground realities, there's so much backdrop of students out there. Students having harassment experiences, students having experiences where students are bullying, and I think there is someone from LMF here who would put more light on that. I think Juhi will have more experiences shared there. So if that kind of experience students have, just having affordable education doesn't do. You have to have people who come together and then take it as a community, and then only we can think of somewhere being near to that inclusive education.
Okay. And Priyank just mentioned, I believe Jui has also had some experience in this area, and you're also someone who has worked with grassroots students and at-risk children. So, how do you incorporate community within a well-established system? What do you have to say about that? And also, this question is directed to everyone. So whoever would like to add, please feel free to do so.
Yeah. So yes, I think I am one of the stakeholders in the SEL ecosystem, social emotional learning, who specifically worked with marginalized sections, high risk communities. I started my journey working in schools, but then I moved to urban slums, and then I moved to sex workers community, and then childcare institutions. So of course, it's been extremely difficult. And how Priyank shared that, about what the community is also reflecting is very important, where the child is living, and what the kind of elements that the child is absorbing becomes very important. And of course, it's greatly like it's a huge challenge integrating social emotional learning, building the idea of safe space in a community which is so dominant in terms of violence. And it's not just limited to bullying. It's you I mean there are I mean sexualization is normalized to a such a great extent that the money generation option is also that. So yeah, how do we integrate it is tapping each stakeholder is very important when you're trying to create change beyond the child as well. So that has been one of our key strategies to do that. Back in the day, we would work with parents, and then we started working with caretakers. It's been difficult to navigate that, in the sex workers community per se, because it's extremely difficult. Then the alternate became, how do you break the intergenerational cycle of trauma and poverty for the child? Get the child out of the community and bring the child into a safer space. So I think every community, when it comes to high risk community, has its very unique set of challenges. It's very difficult to kind of think it from the one and the same lens. Of course, there are some parameters which will become common, but you have to really get deeper into the grassroots element. How intersectionally complicated the space is. What are some of the social and the cultural factors that really integrate into the ecosystem and complicate the ecosystem also, and then come up with that unique strategy to kind of bring that change. And that, I think, has been our learning curve when you're working with high risk spaces as such.
Well, I think that kind of touched upon one of the other questions I had for you, which was about social emotional learning. And
Yeah.
adding on to this, I'd also like to ask, like, how can teachers promote social emotional learning (SEL) without making it a moral studies class? Because that's
Yeah.
what could happen. And then, how can SEL be promoted by just traditional teachers?
I think that's already happening, and I'm not going to be extremely political correct. And that has been one of the most important concerns for me also, because I think India is such a varied country, and it has such a diverse set of cultures, and people really invest a lot in faith and religion in our country. So I see that integration kicking in SEL, and it's also extremely scandalizing for me. But maybe you need to really identify, the right permutation combination, because you really can't take away that faith completely. Because see, I live in Delhi, right, and I'm exposed very differently. I've grown up very differently, and I have a very different intellectual upbringing, but I can't impose that on everybody or everybody that I work with, right? So you really have to find the right fit, in terms of permutation combination, on how much is safe to bring in, from a moral study aspect, and really teach, the true meaning of, moral study would be like ethical decision making, to be conscious building work. It doesn't really have to be that, oh, you have to be this appropriate child who says good morning, good afternoon, raises their hand, to give the appropriate answer and doesn't misbehave at all. We really have to redefine what moral study actually mean, because SEL can bring in such important components like ethical decision making. We've done a lot of conscious building work, and we've been able to break that cycle. I have a student whose father is into, you know grandfather was in the brothel space, dad's into that. He's breaking that because of the conscious building work that we've been able to do, and not because of moral studies. So the definition of moral studies, and of course sensitization around the same, is very important, because I think unfortunately people in India are extremely conditioned. It's not their fault. So rather than being bitter about it and dismissing everything, I've really brought this change in perspective, because I would be like, oh my god, it's so difficult to break this, it's so difficult to break this, and then all you do is drain yourself, and there's no point in it. So it's very important to bring that perspective shift. What components of elements that you're capturing in moral education that can really become the foundation of that school ecosystem, that community ecosystem, and what values that they're actually driving that space on can become an element, can become that moral education, rather than going with that whole cliched element that and what we've been exposed to as students. Unfortunately, I had a moral science period and I never enjoyed it. And so I mean, it's time to really bring that shift in the lens, and bring in some amazing characteristics, and really focus on character building of a space, of a school, of a community, and of course the beneficiaries and the people who are a part of it.
Well, that I can totally relate how
Yes,
you felt
Devi
about
wants
the
to
book.
add something, and I think Devi also
Yes,
wants
please.
to add something.
Devashovi, yes, I was about to ask you about this as well because you know you work with parents and children. So, how would you like to contribute to this question? Do you want me to repeat the question again, or
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please go ahead. I did have a question for Juhi. I was just curious about her work. So, yeah. Can I go ahead with my question or do you want to?
yes, please, please go ahead. We'll carry on with the questions after this.
Yeah, okay. So, Juhi, your response was very interesting. At one point, you mentioned that you help children come out of their trauma by bringing them out of the community, right? I'm guessing that must be a lot of I mean, that must be a challenge in itself because while bringing them out of the community can contribute to the alleviation of one kind of trauma, it could also add to the trauma of being out of their, native environment. How do you account for that? I mean, what have you seen in your experience? Just curious.
Yeah, I think one of our major parts of our work has been around social integration. Can
Mhm.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you
yeah, I
hear me?
can hear.
Yeah, I think one of the key elements of advocacy also has been about Samantha. यू नो इक्वल दर्जा कहते हैं ना जिसको, तो वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट एलिमेंट रहा है हमारे काम का. सो with some of the examples with youth leaders that we worked with, it also depends on choice. I have somebody who wants to be in the community, work towards the upliftment of the community, who's a very community person. I have another set of children who want to move out of the community because they can't really deal with that trauma. They're tired of that identity and they really want to move away. So these are some of the two categories that we initially identified, right? That okay, you have people who are very focused on self, want to build their own future, move away from that identity. And then you have children who want to be in the community and then they want to, kind of work with it. And I think it's an ongoing process.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
triggers you in that journey, you really have to address it real time. Do you have the support system to address some of that? We've built that. So okay, if anything comes up, because it's really shocked me in ways which I had never ever imagined. I don't think any book can teach me to what I experienced, or as a team we experienced, with the relief work and everything. Never ever had imagined that our work and lens will go so intersectional, and you really had to pick up the pulse then and learn and just have that, you can say that wanting to help, willingness to help the child, even with the trauma or, complete breakdowns. And we've had that support in the organization, that we have a trauma informed therapist who also lends a ear to me at times when I lose my sanity. But I think you really need to have some elements which are again core to the process of that healing or getting integrated into the society. It's not easy, it's also going to be a lifelong process. What triggers you 5 years down the line, how the society is behaving, it's completely like out of your locus of control, and there's a lot of awareness work which needs to be done with the general population in terms of destigmatize how they look at marginalized communities, because there's a lot of judgment. And again, it's like this open sea of ocean where who says what you really don't know, who offends you in what way you really don't know, because we've also not been taught about it. Only gender sensitive people, or people who worked in the sex workers community, have that kind of understanding, or for that matter childcare institutions also. A lot of abandonment issues also. A lot of people think that my children have committed crimes, but they're just orphans who are living in childcare institutions. They've not committed any crime, any juvenile crime. So there's a lot of misinformation, misperception that there's, but I think it's an ongoing process. You really need to be equipped as a unit, as a team, on how to address when something comes up, because it will really surprise you in such communities, and it's absolutely out of locus of your control, and it doesn't have a structure as such of what can come up, but you can really have some elements that okay, these things will come up, so you are prepared on how to deal with it. So I think, yeah, I hope I've given you some clarity.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So those were some very valuable insights from both of your experiences, and I believe all the viewers would be very glad that we had that conversation. And I believe Preeti and Pragya were trying to add something in between. Please go ahead if you want to add.
So I just wanted to add on to what Juhi just mentioned about social emotional learning. I think uh, apart from the marginalized communities that she's worked with and she spoke about so passionately, it was very visible. Um, I think what we are seeing is more and more children who are growing into adolescents and young adults who do not have a balanced outlook towards emotions, and probably there is a lot of mental health issues that are stemming from the fact that their social emotional learning has not been appropriately handled during their school years. And I think going back to what Priyank said and even Juhi said, having opportunities for children experience these emotions is very important. Priyank mentioned about different abilities in a classroom. So I think having a multi-age classroom where they're exposed to peers who are older or maybe younger, and dealing with emotions of all children in that space is very important. So I think there are at the smallest unit of learning, that is at this classroom level, at my group level, I should have the freedom to explore my emotions and the rules of the society that I'm part of. And I think that will happen only when we enable bigger conversations there. I think a simple example that I want to give about last week, we had a child in our school who asked a question during circle time discussion. He asked a question like, why is it that only married men, I mean, married men or men, whether they're married or not, have the title Mr. Whereas women, when they are married, it's supposed to be Mrs. And when they're not married, it is Miss. So something as simple as that, the it struck him, and this is a 7-year-old who asked the question. So I think it's about creating those spaces where children can have open conversations and think about these issues. And it cannot be that only after you become an adult you're sensitized towards having empathy towards somebody else. So I think I was just coming from the fact that it has to be addressed in every classroom, in every group setting, that social emotional learning has to become part of how any learning happens.
And while we were on this line of discussion, I had a question for Pragya, because so far we've been discussing about the educator's perspective, and as Pragya, as you're someone who has been working with children and leadership, and I just wanted to know, how do you think ethical consciousness can be something that's led by children, and then how do you think we can work towards not making it a moral science lecture, like adding on to the previous question
Yeah.
as well. So what's
So,
your take on that?
so I think I would step back, and we have such amazing experts on the panel where we have heard from infrastructure to social psychosocial care, and what the foundational learnings, as it were. But I would step back from there to say that here we are talking about 40% of India's population, if you look at the definition of a child, up till 18. And are we looking at a life cycle approach when we talk about learning? Right? So while there is a huge focus on infrastructure, curriculum-based learning, school learning, and I'm not posing as a technical expert, but someone who has gone to school and someone who has interacted with, even from a lay person's perspective, if you look at it, it largely is the domain within the structure of the classroom or a building where we learn. But often enough, what we look at is that the foundational learning, which is your 0 to 6, is often ignored, either by the way of investment, because it's not a formal setup. Either in the rural areas, you will have an Anganwadi, or in the urban settings, probably amongst the privileged, you will have preschool where the cognitive building happens. And many of you may also know that the 90% of the brain development happens in this period. So if we are not investing in that time to build the foundations of learning, I think we are really missing the bus. We can't just wait for the child to turn 6, go to school, and then think that the magic will happen. What are the investments we are making as a society, as in a nation, which kind of looks at education as a life cycle approach at different stages and the requirements that needs to be fulfilled. As a campaigner, I also feel that more and more conversation like these need to happen. And good news is there are those conversations happening at the policy level commitment, as we heard Preeti and Juhi and Priyank also mentioned before. If you look at NEP in general, it talks about 21st century skills, right? It also talks about the 5 C's, as it were. And if I recall, it's critical thinking, creativity, collaboration. It talks about I had put down collaboration, curiosity, and communication, right? So if you're engaging with these 5 C's, and I would throw in a sixth one, which is compassion. And especially during pandemic, when we were campaigning on the agenda, or whether we were running programs as Save the Children in the community, we also felt that there was a breakdown. It's no news that 340 million children were missing out on the school days. There was a disruption there, and especially for the most marginalized, there was no continuum of learning from from the family to the facility, which is school in that case. And there was a background, there was a really real breakdown of learning. And how do you involve parents then? Because learning environment is not just what you get in school, but how you engage. Right to play is another right which is enshrined, and because it's Children's Day, I must talk about that as well. Apart from participation, right to play is an integral part. And when we speak to children in the community, as young as 4 or as old as 15, they all say that in terms of infrastructure, there is only learning and there is no playground, for instance, or there is no incentivizing that would keep them in school and make learning fun, right? Do we encourage curiosity enough? Do we build those cognitive critical thinking, which gives children life skills? And already there's a lot of rethink that's happening at the policy level, at the level of educationists who have been in the sort of realm of defining curriculums and shaping the generations after. So the onus lies on just not on one pillar. I would say the time is now to coalesce together as a community, from educationists to children to parents. It has to be a four-way, like from the structure, which is the school, and all the stakeholders there, from the government, so that the policies that are formulated also become a reality. And one of the key sort of outliers, I would say, in the larger conversation, which has only come to the fore now, which is the mental health of children. A very small sample size, but I would like to mention that we interviewed a mix of parents and young people, which is children, 4,000 odd, across 24 districts of 4 states, which is Maharashtra, MP, Karnataka, and one more. And we found that 39% of children expressed anxiety, which could stem from loneliness, which could stem from the fear of fear of losing a loved one, fear of punishments, and so the children were spending more and more time alone, whether it was dependence on a mobile phone and gaming. And not just in the urban privileged community, but we also found that in the marginalized community, that how it started reflecting in their behavior, where they would spend more and more time, even within a small space where a family would live, alone. And sometimes children can't even express what they are feeling or going through, because it was all very new. And it was all very new for all of us, whether we as an organization who work with children and for children, whether we are talking about teachers. So I think what the need of the hour is to come together, share our learnings to make the 21st century skills, as it were, a reality for children. Because what we do today will shape the generation after. And if we don't invest now, probably we'll be really missing a whole demographic which will grow up ill equipped to deal with the world that they will be living in or the ecosystem around. So, yeah, hope that answers. Or did I miss the tail question that you had? No.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about the audio. There's a faulty fire alarm that's off. Hope that's
Okay.
yeah. Thank God.
Yeah.
Back again. Anyways, yes, the tail question, but I believe you really touched on the main topics that we had to cover, and then as we're moving to the last
One
5 minutes.
last bit. Sorry, Sahil, if I could just
Sure,
add.
sure, sure. Yes,
Uh,
yes, yes. Please add.
So, one of the elements that when we talk about education, we also need to look at the disaggregation between of gender. You know, how during pandemic we saw that girls experienced it so distinctly and disproportionately. Not just missing out on education, which many children did, but many were also being pushed into child marriage. There was increase in violence, and worse still, some of them were also subjected to trafficking. Um, so I think we need to, when we devise systems, we need to apply all the lenses. Whether when we talk about inclusion, it should have a lens which focuses on each and every aspect and segment of children who may be missing out or who may face that vulnerability a little more distinctly than the other.
Well, thanks for answering that really well. And sorry to keep you waiting, Devi Shobha. As you know, the conversation went in a totally different direction. But there's a question that I had for you, and then like we had just discussed, like we talked about building curiosity, life skills, etc., and how these are very important in bringing everyone together to create an ecosystem. And also on the note of inclusivity and how it's not just about students, but also parents. And you have the Inclusivity Summit coming up, right? And how does that collaborate with stakeholders in the ecosystem to expand on the whole idea of inclusivity? So I hope my question was clear.
Yeah,
But I would love to see how you touch upon this. Like, what's your
yeah,
take?
sure. Thank you very much. I think I really enjoyed all the perspectives from the speakers so far. I think all of them were bang on and brought up some very great points, and all of which can be very relevant to what I'm going to be talking about. And this is about true inclusion in a classroom, in the sense that, of course, we talked about getting the perspectives of the children themselves, not shaming the child, not talking down to the child, right? Talking to the child with respect. That I mean, we talked about social emotional learning. We talked about mental health. I mean, all of these factors can definitely and have a great impact on the mental health of children. In fact, shaming and exclusion in a classroom, public humiliation can have very adverse impact on the child, which is not very much um which is not given the weightage that it is supposed to have, right? Teachers generally kind of just brush it off. Parents do not like to bring it up with the teachers or the school. And like Pragna said very nicely, it has to be the four pillars, right? It cannot be just the teachers and the children themselves. And to build a truly inclusive and a diverse culture in a classroom, I think there are some very basic things that we need to follow. That is to you know indulge the children, right? Indulge the children's learning capacities in different ways, right? There are so even when you're not talking about special children, in quotes, in quote unquote, even a normal child, like Priyank said, right? A normal population of in a classroom, they will have a spectrum, because some people learn in different ways. Some children can learn, in a textual manner. Some people learn in a auditory manner. So I mean, this is a spectrum, right? It's just not the autism spectrum maybe, but this is definitely under the spectrum. So there is inclusiveness can come there as well. I mean, you can engage with different kinds of instruction materials. And another thing that we as a schooling system, right, as a society, and even as an educational objective that we fail to address as of now, is that we don't our education is really not geared towards helping the children, at least till the 10th grade or the 12th grade, to actually help them gear up to 21st century skills and get those job skills that will really help them thrive in their careers. So career is a different thing totally. Education is a totally different thing. So education is just about marks. It's not about job fitment. It's not about understanding, what jobs are out there. It's not about understanding what skills, what the world is doing. Generally we are like closed, अपना class है, अपना marks है, अपने exams है, बस इतना करो. And then the teachers are graded according to that. So there is a lot of disconnect between what you're learning and what you're actually going to do. And this is a common refrain even among teachers, even among parents, but there's nobody is doing anything about that, because there's very less empowerment in this area, right? So this inclusion summit that is coming up in March, right? This is in collaboration with MASH as well. So the objective of the summit that I'm organizing is basically just to bridge this gap, like especially for special needs children, especially for neurodiverse individuals, where we look into the areas where right now neurodiverse individuals are getting trained up to, let's say 12th grade, but then many of them are left out of the job market, even despite their very unique skills, despite their great talent, and they're just not able to find a fitment in the job market. And similarly, on the other side, a lot of employers are looking for this kind of talent, but they just do not know where to look for, how to find the right fit. And the major basic objective of this summit is to just fit this puzzle together and bring these different stakeholders together, and spark this conversation and see if we can build up these opportunities for them. That is the basic objective.
So I noticed that you pointed out one aspect of learning and neurodiversity and how we've missed out so far. So what role do you think children play in creating this paradigm shift in educational outcomes? Like, what's the role of children in this? Children.
In,
So far we've looked at. Yeah, I'd like to repeat the question
yeah,
again.
please. Yeah.
So you had you had pointed out that one aspect of learning and neurodiversity we've missed so far in like while you were answering that question. And what I wanted to know is what role do you think children play in creating this paradigm shift in the educational outcomes?
Well, children need to be just themselves. Children need to be able to express themselves, right? So the role children play is just to be themselves, and it's for us to let them be themselves, right? And true inclusion is all encompassing, in the sense that like I think Pragya brought up this very relevant point, that children need to play. There is no there is a lot of restrictions on playing, because again playing is seen as a waste of time. Right now, this is something that we're doing that prohibits children from being themselves. So what is the role of children? Children just need to be themselves. They just need to have the freedom to be themselves. That is true inclusion, right?
So, Sahil, if I may just add from the perspective of working with children, is that sometimes we have to create conscious environment. That's what we have seen. When we form children groups, having them to lead the conversation and walk into the conversation, whether we are talking about gender. It should, and we've also realized that we often talk at children rather than talking to them. So that was one, that when you bring the young group together, where they can have conversation about an issue and feel that their opinion matters, even if you say that, you come up with, I'll give you a simple example. Suppose there is an opportunity and you give them the power and the mandate to say that, why don't you decide who your leader should be, for instance? they would unanimously and more democratically than us adults will decide and position someone who is best suited to represent their collective agenda. Just an example. Second, I feel that children peer-to-peer learning is another when, and not in terms of competition, but really looking at, because children listen to each other more because they have that camaraderie or friendship. How do we encourage that as adults? So it's not about us adults giving them that space to just flourish, but truly believing that they know best. Sometimes when we listen to young people on solutions, uh, probably we feel that we are thinking about it from a lens of an adult, but they have very practical, simple solutions that probably you can design your whole program around. you know so not, and like Gandhi also said that we often feel that us learned, we know all, only if we were to stoop down to listen to so-called illiterate children, or like ignorant illiterate children. So it's so important to give that credence, not just as a lip service, but truly wanting, truly allowing us to be curious about what children want. Like Preeti and Jui both mentioned about how are we asking children what they want in the school? Simple thing like that. What do you want, and including that in building even the infrastructure which Priyank was talking about. So I think it's truly creating and believing in it, more than creating, believing that we want to give this to children, their
Yeah.
voice and choice about. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very small example. The starting point would be to, the CBSE curriculum and the ICSE curriculum both have these, topics for children to, for elocution and essay writing and all of that. One simple starting point could be to just give them the freedom to choose their own topics, right? Instead of just saying, for example, today my daughter was struggling with a topic on good parenting. How will she know what a good parent, I mean, she will know from the perspective of a child, but to talk about being a good parent otherwise, it's like giving, it's like we should really stop doing this thing of, I will say something and you follow through. I think that is what true inclusion really means in a learning culture. So Priyank had something to add, I guess.
Yeah, I was about to get to that. Sorry to keep you waiting. Please go ahead.
I'll
And
just
since we are quite, restricted when comes to time, we'll have to close the session soon after this. And Priyank, please go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, two very brief points to add. I think there are two themes running in this session. One is SEL and another is gender. I'll just try to add two new perspectives to this. One is gender. I think we need to, when we say gender, it's a noun and it's something which is out there, which exists. We have to start talking also about gendering. We have to also look at it as a verb. How women and men come to be as who they are. And there's upcoming literature on this coming from me having a background in academia and social work. And I tell you how it shifts your perspective, because your own abilities, your own efforts in this direction, you ask those questions, how you make gendering happen. Second, SCL, I think one of the problems I've had with people in SCL, or as such SCL as a practice, is we keep seeing SCL as a practice than it as a culture. Now, one might say that it's a practice leads to culture, culture leads to practice. True, but we have to shift again the perspective that where do you center yourself? Is it a practice first or a culture thing first? Because when you say practice, I talk about overt curriculum, but when I say culture, I talk about hidden curriculum. So again, we need to really center ourselves that where do our positioning ourselves when we are into these fields. Thank you.
So, as we're moving to the end of the session, in the interest of time, can we have perhaps some closing remarks from all of you, starting with Devi? And Devi Shobha, can you please uh, give us some remarks, and then we move on to the other panelists as well?
Yeah, sure. So I would just like to thank all the panelists, especially Priyank and Preeti, for responding to my request to join the panel on such a short notice. And this was such a wonderful session in terms of the insights. I think all of us kind of came from a space of experience and true empathy towards true empathy towards the problem, I would say, because we are not trying to, just pinpoint, we are trying to find solutions. I think that came across very well, during the entire discussion. So that was something that I took away from this panel. So thank you very much for this wonderful discussion.
If Juhi would like to go next, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think for me, over the years, one of the biggest things which actually stands out for me in any conversation is inclusion of marginalized communities, because that's been completely non-existent. And I think post the pandemic, people realize with the migrant worker crisis and things falling apart for so many outcasted communities, that it became important to include that as a conversation, right? So I'm very grateful that you guys discovered, like, felt it's important to have a conversation around marginalized community. And I think very very important, very happy that we are discussing elements like neurodivergence. I haven't heard many spaces talking about that, because we also work on that. So, like, starting my Monday on Children's Day, having this conversation with very important stakeholders and taking back so many learnings from each one of you in your own, unique and special way, and all the important and relevant work that you're doing is a great motivator for me to go back and work for the next 1 year, and of course achieve important milestones. And I wish everybody all the best. And again, I would say that SEL is extremely important. I always say, when we think about children or human life, it's always roti kapda makan, and I always go and say roti kapda makan or emotion, because I think it's a
True.
fundamental foundational element in a child's life, in everybody's life, and it has to become in one of those fundamental rights for a child to
True.
express and to learn, to lead a life, where they can really express themselves and tap their unbound potential with SEL, imbibing SEL in their lives as a culture or as a toolkit, whatever they want to. But it's very, very important for all children, be it government schools, neurodivergent, marginalized communities. I think every child deserves that, because I think life will just turn around and help them lead in a very quality way, despite where they come from. So, yeah, thank you for having
Thank
me.
you, Juhi. Thank you, thank you. Now, moving on to Preeti, would you like to add some remarks, closing remarks?
I think my biggest request to everybody on Children's Day would be that
Hello.
we make.
Uh,
Am I audible?
You are.
Okay.
You
I
are.
think biggest request is that we start
yes,
to
Preeti, you're
respect.
audible.
I believe there's a bit of a lag, so I'm just going to continue saying what I'm about to say. We need to start respecting children and not treat them, and like what Pragya was saying earlier, talk down at them. I think it's about making sure that children have our love, but more importantly, have our respect. Um, just the Jaga project that we have started is to ensure that they have the respect that they deserve in terms of even defining how their space should be. We had a very interesting input from one of the children. It came in as to why do we need to have bathrooms with, say, boys and girls? Why do we need that at all? Like tomorrow, there's what is the need today when we are respecting an LGBTQ community to have a boys and a girls bathroom? So those kind of inputs are fantastic, and I think those are the ones that are shaping how our schools are going to be designed. So it's important that we respect, and on Children's Day we all have to pledge that we will respect every child who comes our way, and once you respect them, that's when true inclusion will happen.
Thank you, Preeti. And Pragya, would you like to add some closing remarks?
So I think just the fact that it couldn't be a better day to have this conversation than on Children's Day, as a reminder that education is not merely a moral appeal, but it's something that we need to turn into a reality for generations who will inherit, the future and the country, and play that role. And when they can play that role of an active citizen only when they're empowered enough. And I think it's a conscious choice that we make, whether we are NGOs, educationists, teachers, whatever role that we are playing, or even as a parent, that's where it all starts, to have that consciousness and to build consciously. So that would be my appeal and urge, that I think I would echo what Preeti said, that I think let's begin there, to move away from just education as a moral appeal of emancipation, but truly looking at it as how education equips and empowers every individual, every child, to lead and shape the future that they deserve. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Sahel, for an amazing conversation. And I'm taking away a lot of learning from each of the insights that I've heard from the fellow panels. Thank you so much. And you for being an amazing moderator.
Thank you. I did try. And thank you, Pragya. And thanks to all the panelists who have gathered here. It was an amazing session. And so this brings us to the end of the discussion. And apologies for being a little bit overtime, a little bit too much overtime. But this was a very important discussion. And you all had very valid and very relevant points to share. And would have been ashamed to restrict that. But thanks for being here. And thanks for this wonderful discussion. And hope you all have a nice day.
Thank you.